Thanks everyone for taking the time to meet with us this morning. I know everyone's probably had their fill of Zoom meetings for the year, so we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, and we're excited to have the opportunity to do this. Thanks to the Chamber for hosting this for us, and thanks especially to Andrea for all her help organizing. My name is Matt Dean, and with me is Alex Frey. We're part of Hansman Weibel's Business Insights and Analytics team. So we're really excited to talk about data analytics today. Um, we'll try to get everyone out right at noon. I don't want to make anyone late for lunch or anything. So we'll go over the analytics process at a high level and then give you some ideas to consider, some things to think about before you start any kind of analytics project. So I'll let Alex start us off. Alex?
Okay, thanks, Matt. So the first thing that we're going to do is identify the problem. And this is a presentation about data analytics, so you might be wondering why we're going to start with identifying the problem. And the reason for that is it's really important to start off with a clear goal for what you want to measure, because with data analytics, there's so much information available and there are so many things you can do. You can turn almost anything into a dashboard or a graphic. But if it's just that and it's not helping you move towards a goal, then it's not really going to be all that helpful. So kind of to aid us in this process of identifying a goal, we are going to do a little exercise. And we would like everybody to think of, if you had a magic wand and you had unlimited wishes with that wand, what would you change about your business? So right now, just kind of start anything that pops to mind, just start thinking of things. You can write them down if you want. Don't really think about costs or other barriers at the moment. This is a magic wand after all. So we're just trying to get some ideas for what the things are about your business that need to be changed or should be changed. And once you have a list of those, normally you would be doing this with a team of people, and you could, with your team, identify maybe the top 3 or 4 items that are going to give you the most value to actually pursue. So, maybe if you write down your list and you have 12 items, you could narrow it down to 3 or 4 that are going to give you the best return on putting some effort into working on. So if people have a few things that they've thought of, maybe you could chat them in, and we could look at those a little later. So for now, I'm going to turn it over to Matt.
Yeah, so if you think about some ideas, ways you'd like to improve your business, like Alex said, feel free to chat those in if you've got some ideas. Interested to hear your thoughts on those. But while you're doing that, just a quick definition of data analytics. Really, it's the process of accumulating your data, cleaning it up to a usable format, and then summarizing it to where you can get some insights of it, all for the purpose of making decisions with that data. This graphic really visualizes one of the key points we want to make today, and that your data really should be used to drive some sort of action. Most organizations they've got key metrics, key performance indicators, information they already look at to see how they're being successful, net income, that sort of thing. But these really tell you where you've been with your business, and with the analytics, you can use it to drive change. So with what Alex talked about, what issue are you trying to solve? What improvements would you like to make? That's the action you want to focus on. Because if you're measuring data and then not really doing anything with it, you're just sort of measuring for the sake of measuring. And when that becomes really powerful is when you take your data and you can pull in data from other sources and try to identify relationships between those two data sets. If you just want to see how well your company's doing compared to your peers in the industry, you could also take your financial information and then compare that to some industry benchmarks, other industry information, and you see how you're doing compared to your industry. But you can get a little more creative with it. So say, for example, you take your sales information and then you pull in historical weather data. So you might look for trends to see, when do you have the most sales? Is it when it's hot and sunny out? Is it when it's cold and rainy? You might have people coming to your business buying things. And then you can get that information and identify those trends there, and then really use that to forecast some out into the future. So you could say, take that trend and then look at the weather forecast over the next couple weeks and kind of predict out how busy you think you'll be. Maybe you could use that to inform your staffing. Maybe if you know it's going to be cold and rainy, you may have less people there to try and reduce your payroll, cut out some overtime. But that's only as good as the weather forecast too. But that's just one example. Another interesting case study I read recently, it was a service authority. They wanted to reduce the amount of water wasted through leaks at customer locations. So they took historical customer data to get a baseline of how much they used. And then if they identified continuing spikes in their usage, they would send a notification to the customer and say, hey, we think you have a leak. We'll come take a look at it. And then that way they were able to identify those leaks sooner and then end up in, having people waste less water. And nobody wants those surprise $100, bills because they've got a leak somewhere. We did have couple ideas chatted in, how to reduce present customer churn and how to reduce new customer acquisition. So those are both great ideas. You could, see what kind of data you have available and maybe identify what causes the customer to churn or how you can get a new customer on board faster. So Alex is going to have some more information for us on the next slide, and then an example of a visualization. So I'll turn it back over to you, Alex.
Thank you, Matt. So after you have identified what problem you want to solve, then you need to identify what data you're going to need in order to solve that problem. So for example, internally, we're a CPA firm. So let's say we'd like to reduce turnaround time for tax returns. So we would need to know when the work comes in the door, how long it takes in each step, and when it is being delivered to the client. Now, we are tracking all that and we do have all that, but if you need data that you're not currently tracking, then you would need to start tracking it and capturing it before you can do the analysis for it. And remember, data can come from many sources. Of course, an accounting system or records are going to be a very rich source of that data, but it's definitely not the only one. You have workflow management software. You can even get GPS records from vehicles. You have maybe donor databases for a not-for-profit, external industry information. And as we mentioned, if you don't currently have the data, that's okay. You can start capturing it and then you can analyze it going forward. So now I will share the kind of sample that we have put together. And Matt, you're going to have to let me know if I share the wrong thing.
No, that's the right one.
Okay, so what we have here is a sample dashboard that has been created using some data from a real local not-for-profit entity. But that being said, this could be easily translated to a for-profit business, and I'll kind of point those out as we walk through the example. Before we get started, I also just want to quickly show that this is what the source data looks like. And you can see it's just kind of a CSV file with lots and lots of rows of data. Lots of columns as well. There is a whole lot of information here. You don't necessarily need all of it, and it can actually be a little overwhelming to have this much information. So it's much better to have something in a format like this, where you could really dive down into what you really need. So this particular dashboard has been put together using Power BI. And as I mentioned, the data is from a real local not-for-profit, but the kind of business issues that I'm about to talk about, I made up for the purpose of this presentation. So since we have talked about, a general overview process of using analytics to solve business issues, I kind of came up with an example of maybe how it could apply here. So let's assume that the leadership at this organization did that magic wand exercise. And kind of what they determined was they would like to change their current office space if they could change anything. Maybe the capacity for their staff and the number of individuals they can serve comfortably in their current space they weren't happy with. They've increased the number of individuals they served up through the beginning of this past year before COVID, and they were starting to feel a little cramped in their space. And they also had some complaints from some individuals that they were serving that the office was a long drive from where they lived. And as I mentioned, they did have a little bit of a drop because of COVID. And so one of their goals is also to increase the number of individuals they're serving at 10% going forward. So based on all of that, there are kind of 3 questions I think we can consider as we're going through this example. So how can they easily track whether or not they're meeting their goal of increasing the number of clients served? Do they need to find a new office location? And if so, where should it be located? So the very first thing I want to point out before we really get started is that with Power BI, everything you see here is interactive. And so by changing one thing or clicking on one thing, you can filter all of the information based on that. So if we look at this dates served up here, I have it set to start at July 1st, 2016, but actually the source data went all the way back to 2008. So I could change it all the way back to 2008 and you'll see everything change on this dashboard to update for all of that information. Now, this is more than we need for this purpose, so I'm just going to change it back. I just wanted to show you how everything on the dashboard changed when those date range changed. So the first question of how are they going to track whether or not they're meeting their monthly goal, I want to look at these 2 in the center here. So we have monthly individuals served and goal for percentage change in numbers served. So first of all, I just want to say, this could easily be substituted for increase in number of customers or quantity of a product sold or even sales volume for a for-profit entity. And this monthly individuals served is showing the number of people that were served for the most recent month of data available. So the idea is that you would update the information that is populating this report on a monthly basis, and it would always show you the most recent month, and so that you could track that going forward. You could also pick any time period, really, weekly, daily, if you had it at that level of detail. I just picked monthly. And this goal down here is how going to help you track your progress. So the goal is set to be the previous month's actual times this goal for percentage change in number served. So it is set to their goal of 10%, but if we were to change it to 20%, it would update. Well, it didn't actually update the date because 20%, but if we changed it to 29%, it changed the goal to 8. But let's just move it back to what the actual goal is. And then the number in the center is the actual current month of 4. And then you can see it's showing in red because they did not meet their goal. If they had met it, it would be showing in green. So, this is a very simple but effective way to easily visualize whether or not that they are meeting their monthly goal. And you can easily change that goal by changing this percentage in here. So the rest of the visualizations we're going to use to talk about the last 2 questions related to the office space. So, their capacity problems and the actual location of their office. So first, we're going to look at capacity by looking at this graph at the bottom, actual individuals served compared to capacity. So this green line, this up and down, is showing the actual number of people that they served over time. And this dashed line right here is their capacity. So you can see that, back in the earlier years, there was a little bit of problem. Maybe every once in a while they would be a little squeezed on their capacity. But in 2019, there were quite a few months where the capacity was exceeded. And that kind of accounted for that um, answer to the magic wand problem, where people were saying they wanted to increase their capacity. And then you can see, as we mentioned, there was that decrease because related to COVID during 2020. Now that side of the graph shows everything that has happened already, and then the right side of the graph is showing a projection for the future. So the blue line represents a forecast that's been created using statistical modeling for the number of people that they expect to serve over the next year. And then the yellow line is actually that projection, but adjusted for their goal of increased 10%. So if they met that 10% goal every month for the year, the yellow line would be the actual capacity. And then the gray lines on the outer edges are just the confidence interval for that statistical model. So, we can make a few observations from this graph. The first is that, if this forecast were exactly correct, that they would not exceed their capacity for the full year, even if they reached their goal of increasing by 10% every month. But the second observation is we know that statistical models are not necessarily 100% going to be correct. So, looking at this 80 and 95% confidence interval for most of the year, that's actually above their capacity. So this graph tells us, maybe they need to do some further analysis before they can make a decision about whether or not they need to have a bigger space. Now, maybe they could analyze some of the data they already have further, or maybe they want to wait a little bit longer and keep looking over time and see how things change. They have a few options. So then next, we're going to look at the question of the location for their office. And, this part of the analysis could easily be converted to a for-profit business. If you're thinking maybe they want to consider whether or not they should open a new store location based on sales volumes or locations of known customers. So on this right side of the dashboard, we have two visuals. The first is this map of actual individuals served by location, and it is representing zip codes of their actual people that were served based on where their residence is. The darker the color, the more people are in that location. And so we can very clearly see these three in the center here kind of are where most of the individuals are served. And so those are like 22901, 02, and 03, the greater Charlottesville area. And their current office location is within one of those zip codes. So, just looking at this map, it seems maybe they don't really need to move their location. But we do need to consider that this map is showing individuals served over the full time period we have. So anyone served in 2016 is showing up in these locations, even though they might have not been served in 2020 as well. So if we want to look at potential trends and changes in location over time, we can look at this scatter plot below. And for example, let's take one of the top locations in 22901. If we click on that zip code on this map, it'll filter everything in the report by that, and then we can see that there is actually a decrease since 2017 in the number of individuals served in that specific zip code. Now, if we look at one of the ones that has fewer individuals served, let's see, 22940 or 22932, we can see that those actually were showing a little bit of an increase in individuals served. And, that's, keep in mind that that's still a very small percentage of the total people served. So they probably wouldn't want to move the whole office location. But one possible option could be to have a small office opened up in one of those zip codes on the western part of town and maybe downsize a little bit in their current zip code where they're currently located. That is certainly an option, but there would certainly be several other factors they would need to consider if they were thinking of doing something like that. For example, maybe they know that they serve some individuals whose primary language that they speak is Spanish, and they only have one staff member who actually speaks Spanish. So they're thinking, well, if we decide to split into two offices, where should that person work? Which office should that person work in? So, we have over here the number of people that they have served who speak Spanish. If we want to see where those people are located, we can just click on the Spanish on that graph, and it shows that most of those people are in that cluster that we saw earlier of the greater Charlottesville area. So in that case, they would want to make sure that staff person stayed in that office. So again, this is kind of like a simplified version of things. We're not going too into like detail, just for like the general overview here, but that is we just wanted to give people an idea of how you could use something like this to do a data analysis and to solve a business problem that you have. So does anybody have any questions?
So we do have a question on what platform we're using for this dashboard. So this was put together with Microsoft's Power BI. So it's a Power BI dashboard. Great. And feel free to chat in if you have other questions, or we'll get the slides sent out to you. Our contact information is going to be on the last slide. We like talking about this data analytics stuff, so feel free to get in touch with us if you had any questions or you just want to you have some ideas. Alex, if you could pull up that flow chart in our last couple minutes here.
Sure thing.
Alex put together a fantastic flow chart that this really just walks you through what the thought process is. So you start up front with identifying your goal, then identify what your data needs are, and whether or not you're currently capturing that data, and just kind of the process to walk through. So if you're not capturing the data, identify what you need, and then go through the process of evaluating. And then it's really a continuous process of evaluating the data, seeing if what you're doing is working, or maybe you decide you need different data. So the one thing we really like about Power BI is it's interactive and you can go in and make updates and changes. And we'll get this sent out with the slides as well. But looks like we're right up to 12 o'clock. So like I said, I don't want to make anyone late for lunch, myself included. So feel free to contact us if you have any questions. But thanks again, everyone, for your time today, and I hope you have a great Monday.
Thank you, Matt and Alex. We appreciate you all taking the time to do this presentation. We did share it on Facebook, and we will certainly send you all the link as well. And you can email me the slides, and I can be sure to forward it out to those who attended today. So thank you all. And are there any other questions from anyone else? Okay.